Welcome to Into the Nuance, compassionate, evidence-based pre-med advising. Join us each episode as we unravel the complexities, debunk myths, and explore the many paths to medical school. Whether you're a freshman or a pre-med veteran, we are here to provide informed, realistic, and hopeful advice on your journey. Tune in for interviews with experts, stories of triumph, and useful tips as you continue towards medical school. This is Into the Nuance, and we're so glad you're here.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Into the Nuance. We're excited to talk to you today, and we have lots of stuff to talk about now that we're getting into secondary seasons and people are coming off the wait lists at schools. There's so much happening in the next couple of months. So let's kick it off. I actually just have I have something that just came up, guys, that I wanted to share with you and get your thoughts on it. I know we're all working with students right now who are just finishing their cycle with FAFSA, with waitlists, and they're doing their FAFSAs and they're waiting to hear back from financial aid packages. One of my applicants just texted me and said that he just got off the phone with the dean of admissions at a medical school, and that person told him that because of the delays with FAFSA, that there's a huge delay in schools accepting people off the wait list. What are your thoughts on that? Have you heard anything about this?
Yes, the FAFSA rollout this year, the brand new FAFSA was supposed to be easier for everybody. Wasn't easier for anybody, including the person who was in charge of rolling it out, who is no longer with the federal government. They had to resign because of this botched rollout. So it seems things are in better straits now. The FAFSA is getting processed, but they've processed something around, I want to say, don't quote me on this number, but it was like 20,000 FAFSAs actually got processed incorrectly. And they got the wrong awards, and then they had to go back and reprocess them. And some people didn't get as much, or some people got more. So there was a lot of problems with how FAFSA rolled out. And so it just huge delays, and then people getting the wrong results. And so schools having to readjust for that.
Well, let's talk about how that plays into the whole waiting to hear back from schools and wait lists. How does that impact the med school process? So, you know, the date has come and gone where people have to release all of their other acceptances. So now at this point, everyone should have one acceptance and they should be holding on to that. Now, historically, schools would have given out the financial aid packages prior to that April 29th date so that everybody knows what their financial aid package looks like by the time they have to commit to a single school. If they didn't have that financial aid package to make that decision, this year, I'm assuming they were able to ask the schools for an extension because they couldn't make a decision without knowing what their financial aid looked like. So what does that mean for people who were waiting on those folks to withdraw so they could come off the wait list? I don't know how many people are still hanging on to more than one school. I don't think any of us would know that data, but it's very possible that people are still doing that. And so that might have a big impact this year on the timeline of things.
Yeah, and I'll say just from my experience, I've definitely talked with students who, a lot more students than usual, who are still on a wait list. You know, usually there's a lot of flurry of activity that happens at the end of April and early May in the wait list once people do make those decisions. And it's holding patterns right now, which I think can be really hard. You know, my student reached out and said, "Hey, should I be restudying for the MCAT? Should I be working on my reapplication? Because of course AMCAS is opening, right? All of those things. It's open already. So if you're waiting on a wait list, do you go through the process of reapplying or starting to study for the MCAT?" And I think that's a tough question, right? It's a lot of time, energy, and money to start a process that if you get an acceptance, you just have to stop, right? Like it's a tough decision, I think, either way, that I think we've all had to navigate at different points. So for this student, I'll just give it a vignette. Maybe we can all kind of brainstorm how we would help this student. This student, first-time applicant, is on 2 wait lists at 2 of her top schools. So she's really excited about both options. One was a deferred decision that then became a wait list, and the other was just a straight wait list. And she did well on her MCAT, but had one low score within the 4 sections that she thinks is hurting her application. But otherwise has been told that her application is really solid. She's in a master's program. So her question is, should she just reapply? And if so, to the same schools? And is that MCAT score holding her back? So if you guys heard that student, what would you say?
My first question would be, I don't know how low that score is, and I don't think that that one low score is probably holding her back unless it's below a 122 in cars. If
I
it's
believe it's a 123 or 4 in cars.
okay, I don't think a 124 is going to hold her back. Some schools may have some issue with a 123, but unless she's only looking at Ivies, I mean, are they both top 10 schools?
They're both top 50 schools. Yeah.
Okay. It's hard to say if that's the reason. A lot of people, I'm in the same boat for years. By now, I would say the majority of my applicants would have had at least one acceptance. And this year I have not a ton, but just probably a handful more people that are only waitlisted at this point, had enough interviews, but then got waitlisted. And that's such a scary place to be for the reason you stated. But a lot of times people do have to reapply. Now, for this woman, I would say I probably would start preparing an application just like everybody else, anybody. I would tell them that, because you don't want to wait until you find out at the end of July that you didn't get in, and then you start reapplying. That's too late. So I don't know if she should really retake her MCAT over this. It depends on how willing she is to retake the MCAT, but I don't think it's her MCAT. I think it's just this year. I think there are more people being waitlisted this year for some reason. And then you said it's her top 2 choices. Did she email both of those schools already and send like a strong interest email, and say like, I really want to come to your school?
Yep. And doing all the things, meeting, reaching out to the deans, all of those things. I think it's just like what you said. I think there's a holding pattern due to this FAFSA fiasco, we can alliterate and call it, where it's just harder for the schools to make decisions about the wait list. And I think at competitive schools, right, there's always a chance that that school is a top school for somebody. And so it's harder to commit to somebody on the wait list if they're not sure about someone they've already sent an acceptance to, right? Yeah. So it's just a tough situation because it's like there's no easy answer, at least on my side with MCAT. Like, I don't know, Doug, if you have a similar thought, but like one section, it's hard to target when you already did pretty well in every other section. There's a chance that it doesn't go as well, especially if you're rushing to do that retake. It's a hard position to be in.
I would say that the risk doesn't match the benefit of potentially retaking, because if you're going to do a retake, it's currently we're at the beginning of May, and you'd want to take that retake probably no later than the end of June, so you can get your score by the end of July. You're not delaying things too badly. That's not a lot of time if you're just going to start picking up from scratch, and like, because I'm assuming the person hasn't been studying for a while now.
Right. It's been a minute, right? So it's definitely picking up. And then to Joanne's point, like if you do have to start doing that reapplication, then you're also trying to work on your application, make some changes, make decisions about school lists, and study frantically for the MCAT. It doesn't feel as worth it.
And see if they'll rewrite your letters.
Yeah, right. It's a lot too. And I'll open that back up. So with this student, maybe hold off on the MCAT, right? Get that application in, see what happens. And it can always be an option to take the MCAT later on if it's really clear.
Schools. Maybe the
different schools
that person applied to were maybe too high for the numbers that she had. Maybe it's down a couple, mixes in some different kinds of schools in there that wouldn't mind her 124, then it wouldn't be an issue, right? She wouldn't have to retake it. I will say this though, I have had over the last 10 years so many people get accepted at the end of July, like days before orientation,
which is so wild to me. Talk about like an emotional roller coaster, right?
Not just emotional, but a financial roller coaster. Because here's what happens. They go to another state, they get an apartment thinking they're going to one med school. They put deposits down, and then they get accepted to a different school, and they're losing all of that money and jumping on a plane and driving across or going across the country. Or let's just say they haven't started med school. They're living at home. They're, going to work day in and day out. It's normal life. Boom. 3 days later, they're jumping on a plane and driving or flying across the country, finding an Airbnb and moving to another state with days notice. Could you imagine your life like that?
No, and I don't imagine how that's setting you up for success your first year in medical school either. I mean, goodness, that like I would have to be like, whoa, and like I need a month to settle in, let alone start with really challenging courses the next week. So I would not wish that on anyone. I wish that there was a hard deadline for schools to say, no, like this is our class.
I agree. Yeah, that would, I mean, July 1st, let's say, everybody has to
Yeah.
July 1st, that gives
Yeah.
you a month to plan. I agree. I feel like this process is insane when it comes to being so inconsiderate of humans' lives, like how they are supposed to function as people over the year and a half that this process lasts.
Well, and let's not forget that most of the apartments are already gone. So rent's going to be higher and you're going to have to probably drive farther than you want to drive because you can't live close to school. And so that just makes that sort of amplifies that whole thing too.
Yeah, imagine if you get into UCSF, right? Like, how are you going to afford those rents? It's crazy, like to not have support. And we've talked a lot, like over the course of this podcast, about the cost prohibitive nature of pre-med. And I actually was on a call with my tax guy earlier today, and he even admitted, he's like, I always wanted to be a doctor. I really like, it was always a dream of mine, but it was cost prohibitive. I couldn't justify the money that it takes to get there. And like, I just need to start working. So I did accounting instead. And it's a story we hear a lot, right? And we try to find workarounds and we try to find ways to support students, but there's no getting around the fact that even like you said, like moving and paying rent at the beginning of your med school career is its own animal, like after all of the other things that have happened in the last 2 years.
Oh yeah, and they have this, I don't know who they is, the man. They've sold us on this idea that, if you become a physician, it's such a noble and such a thing that you're supposed to forget about all of that. You're just supposed to be so thankful, right, that you're allowed to do this job, that you never question why it costs $400,000 to go to some schools and why you have to do all of these crazy things to get there. I wonder if there'll ever be a day in America where people don't see being a physician as being this unattainable or this extremely what am I trying to say?
Like elite position, I
Yeah,
guess.
I mean, it's always going to be an elite position because it pays so well, but just, I mean, being a programmer pays so well, right? I mean, there
Yeah.
are other jobs that pay so well. Why is it that being a physician and why is it that it's up there above everything else?
I mean,
Yeah.
I would argue that the shine is already coming off because it doesn't pay as well as it used to.
Mhm.
In some fields, yeah.
Like in a lot of the fields that most people are going to be able to get into, except for those really, niche specialists
Mhm.
positions that, it's just a job at this point for many people. Instead of being, I'm a doctor, it's like, yeah, I'm a doctor. I work in the ER and
Yeah.
I have to have a side gig too. I've seen many doctors have side gigs teaching things like MCAT, for example,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
or
yeah. A lot of
admissions
people work multiple
advice.
jobs.
So
Yeah. And I think like that's an important just piece of awareness, for pre-meds, is to know like, hey, like we can't ignore the reality of the financial burden of the pre-medical process. Like, even though it's a dream and it's a very important dream for the individual to go and be a physician and make a difference in the world, the reality of the financial burden is still a reality that needs to be addressed. Or if it isn't, it can cause a lot of problems later on in life, right? One of my good friends is a financial advisor for physicians, young physicians. And it's great that some physicians do have access to somebody like her, but a lot of times, she says she has to encourage them to go to residencies where they have programs that help pay off some of their debt, because like rural programs and things like that, because they can't afford to live in a big city and go to a residency that pays them pennies with the debt that they've accrued over their education experience, right? And especially if someone wants to start a family, right? And go
Oh
through
yeah.
that process. Like, we live in the real world where things cost money, right? And even though being a doctor is like this amazing calling for many of our students, the realities also need to play into the decision making of things like, do I reapply this year or do I wait and make some money and decide and after the fact, right? Because I think that's a good consideration as well. Like, I'm tempted to tell this student a little bit like, wait and see, you know, and then if it doesn't happen, wait a year to apply, right? And take some time and, you know, refill those financial, you know, savings accounts and try again next year when you have a little more clarity versus rushing this process this year. But that's a hard thing to say to a student too, who has to delay their dream another year.
Well, and if they do that as a reapplicant, they'll more than likely be successful the second time, because reapplicants are often pulled and put in a separate file for screening. So if she were to wait a year, like let's say it doesn't work out and she keeps working, and I always ask people who have to reapply, do you love your job? And if you don't love your job, quit your job right away. Just, you know, find a different job, because you shouldn't do something you hate for one more year just because you think it looks good on an application. Go find something you're really passionate about and go do that for another year. If you have to spend another year out, find something to make you happy. Not doing your dream or your passion for one more year of your life, you know, 1 year out of 80 years is not that significant. I know for us who are older, for young people, it feels like forever, but 1 year is not that significant. And if you're doing something you love, it's going to go by fast. But I would say you'll be more successful as a reapplicant. Wait a year, apply early, start your app in January, apply early, and then find out early you got in, and then you can just enjoy life for the next so many months, rather than like we're talking about. Even if she were to get in late July, the amount of stress that's going to cause her compared to having that extra year. I mean, at the end of the day, she'll be happy she got in, but she would probably be
It's a
way
stressful
more
experience.
Yeah, it would
Yeah.
be she'd be way more happy if she knew she got in October and could plan her life and what, you know, walk into med school calmly and have a nice apartment furnished and be organized and have everything set, versus like stumbling into med school frantic, confused, you know, like figuring life out as you're going, and that's so hard to do. And I really feel bad for people in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say this over and over again. I feel like I can speak for you guys, but say, tell me if I'm wrong. I've never had a student wait a year that regretted it.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I've never ever had a student come back and was like, I wish I had waited a year. Like, every single student I've ever worked with where the decision has been to wait have been like, I'm so glad I did, because I'm so much more confident, or I've worked on myself, or I've gotten some savings, or I've, you know, met my partner, or like there are just so many things that happen in a year when you give yourself some space and time. And so that's always what I say is like, if I had one student regret it, I would maybe change my tune, but I've never in my 5 years had a student say, oh man, I should have applied last year. Like, that's
Yeah.
never been a comment.
Well, and sometimes, you know, life happens in really interesting ways that you can't predict or control that. And I'm not saying that things happen for a reason, but I'm working with this man right now who is a reapplicant. So he's, you know, this cycle, it didn't work out and he started early. He knew it wasn't going to work out. And so had he been successful, he would be planning to go to med school right now. He does major research. He's an MD PhD applicant, and he just got this ginormous grant in his own name to do this project in cancer research. I mean, this is a big deal. This guy's doing big stuff. And he was telling me about it. He was so excited. And I'm like, so let me get this straight. If you were successful, you wouldn't have got this grant, because you would be going to med school right now. And this, are you saying this grant's like life-changing for you? It's going to put you on a path that's honestly going to change things for you? And he's like so glad he got this grant. And like, this is such a big deal to him. And I'm like, okay, so had you not, you know, because you're a reapplicant, there are some pretty good things that are about to come your way for the next year. And, you know, and even he was like, yeah, I'm not saying I'm happy I'm a reapplicant, but I am happy it worked out the way it did. And like you said, Amanda, we don't know what's to come. We don't know what the next year looks like. It could just be a really basic, boring year, but we don't know. You don't know. So try, if you are in that situation right now where you don't know what's going to happen, try to keep an open mind and like, just try to think, okay, what can I do to make the most of this time? What can I do to make this year a great year, not a year I'm dreading, or a year that I see as some kind of failure or punishment I have to endure. Think about it as like, what do I get to do with this time I have? That's how I would think about it.
Yeah. And I think I do the same thing with retaking the MCAT, right? Where it's like, let's think about this as like, okay, I get to learn this. I get to try out new things. I get to take my time now. Um, I think what we're kind of all in agreement here is like rushing the process, whether it's MCAT prep or reapplying, never feels good as a coach. Like, and it may work out for the student, but it's tough on the coaching side. Like, Doug, I don't know if you feel the same way, but when a student comes to me and is like, I need to retake the MCAT in 6 weeks, like my heart drops and I'm like, oh, that's gonna be so hard as a coach to help you get there. Um, so
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I've turned people away in those kind of drama moments of like, I'm gonna really do it this time or something, and we've got 4 weeks. Like, can we turn this into 8 weeks at least? It's just the rushing thing. It doesn't bode well for getting better at a test where you're still below 500.
yeah, and a stressful
Especially.
test, right? Like
Yeah.
adding stress to a stressful test doesn't it just compounds the stress, right? It doesn't negate it. Um, and I think back to myself in my early 20s and I was in a rush, right? I think we all were like in a rush to get where we want to go. And I'm empathetic to it, but I think coming out the other side, like our job as coaches is to be like, I know it feels like you have to get there yesterday, but it's not necessarily where your path needs to lead. Um, and I think like I wish somebody had told me that at 21, I guess, when I'm looking back.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think about myself in my 20s and I was in such a mad rush to get to the top and I worked so hard. I didn't make time for anything else. I put work and school above everything. And yeah, by the time I hit 38, 39, I crashed and burned. It was bad because I had never figured out how to live a balanced life. I had always been in school and working full time and um I don't say I don't want to say I see that for so many people, but I worry about that for so many people who try to go to school full time, study for the MCAT, plan to go straight through. They're doing 3 major life events at once, and then they're going to take no time off, 1 month between graduating and starting med school, jumping into another very rigorous and mentally draining process, and just doing that for basically 12 to 16 years straight. Like, no wonder we have such a burnout issue with physicians because humans can't do that. Like, we have to rest sometimes.
Yeah, I
And
mean, you were better than me. I mean, 38, 39, I have burnt out at 28 after doing that for so many years, and that was my, getting rejected from medical school year where I had to take a step back and be like, what did I just spend the last 15 years of my life doing? And is it worth it? So we would rather that not have to happen for our students, I think. And it's tough to see students make choices that barrel them to a likely burnout.
yeah.
I burned out in the middle of grad school. I didn't even get that far. I was just going through the motions at that point in my life. I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, but I guess I'll go do this next thing that somebody told me to do, and I'm gonna do this next thing and find myself in graduate school. So the first couple of years were all right, and then I was like, really what I want to do? Do I really want to do this chemistry thing? And and it drug my feet and drug my feet and drug my feet, and then I started a different degree, and then I started a different degree, and then I was like, nah, I'm done. Test prep it is. So it's changed my life completely. How old was I? Like 25.
I
So
feel like that's a common story, right? Like for our students too, of like kind of bouncing from degree to degree a little bit and um, wanting to stay in school, which is comforting, but also, burning out as you go. Um, so yeah, I think we all have those stories, right? Like I'm like, oh yeah. And I think one thing that helped me was taking care of yourself is also a job. Was one of someone told me that when I was kind of having a rough time when I was 28 is taking care of yourself, mental health, physical health is also a job, and you have been neglecting that job, and you need to now prioritize that job and do that over these other things that you're choosing to do. And I think that helped me refocus my life balance a little bit. It's like treating it like a job because I was so in the work mode at that point that I was like, well, I need a job. So I guess my job is taking care of my health. And it helps, for the mindset.
You two would be so proud of me because in the last week, I've used learning science in about 3 different conversations. So I was talking to a person the other day and they said, they kind of snuck it in there. They're like, well, I haven't been sleeping, and they're studying for the MCAT. And I said, hold on, wait a second. What'd you just say? You haven't been sleeping? And then I said, do you know how the brain actually works? And I said it again today to another person. I said, you know how the brain works, right? Like you're stretching your brain. You're uncomfortable while you're studying because you're working that muscle. And the only way that you're going to remember or retain anything is while you sleep. It's while you rest. It's while you're not studying, when the brain processes that information and makes it stick. So you are literally wasting your time studying all day if you are just going to continue to stay up all night and never let yourself rest. And so I had to really break that down for about 3 people this week, and explain to them that no, it's actually when you're, laying back, taking a hot bath and not listening to Anki decks, and not, like one person's like, well, I always listen to my whatever when I'm on the bike exercising. And I'm like, well, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should just relax a little bit, I don't know. What do you think about that? Should they be listening to their Anki deck while they're relaxing
Oh,
or doing their Anki, their
like
card?
you're not going to learn by osmosis. Like maybe something's going to stick there, but unless you're actively trying to engage with the content, it's just noise. Might as well listen to some That Ain't Texas stuff or whatever the Beyonce song is right now. But like it's just, there's value in silence because that's when your brain can sort stuff out. You can, you don't have to constantly be going 100 miles an hour because the brain will still be working on the problems in the back of your head. And sometimes it's just good to tune out.
Yeah, I know students use that a lot to alleviate their anxiety and their fear of I'm not studying enough. So they'll listen to podcasts, they'll listen to this podcast is not contents. This counts as good recharge. But like they'll listen to science videos, YouTube videos, they'll go through their Anki decks whenever they have downtime, because a lot of students, I think, when they have downtime or they're taking care of their bodies or themselves, they feel guilty. I should be studying. I should be studying. And so this alleviates that feeling of guilt, shame, anxiety by giving their brain a little like, well, I'm doing something. And ironically, to Doug's point, it's if anything hurting. It's if anything hurting your studying, but it makes you feel good. So it's a little bit of a reward pathway. So what I do with students is we don't want to replace it with nothing, because replacing a bad habit with nothing is not an effective way to reset habits. So I say, okay, you can think about your strategy. You can think about your mantras. You can think about how you're going to approach test day. If you really need to think about test day on your downtime, think about how you're going to speak positively to yourself in the car section, or how you're going to take breathing breaks in biochem. Like that's what you can be thinking about when you're resting, but I don't want you thinking about content, because that's not going to help your brain recharge. And what usually happens is they don't want to think about that, because that's hard work too. And so then if their only choice is to think about mantras and strategy or rest, they'll rest, right? But the content is just, it's almost like a fear preventer, right? Like, oh, I should be studying, but like if I just feel like I am, I'll do it. We all do that. Like I feel like I'm being productive if I'm looking stuff up on my phone, even though I'm not. But it's okay to rest. One quote that has been circulating in like the mental health field or physical health is, if you do not take rest, rest will take you. And it will take you at a very inconvenient time. And I think like they were referring to physical health, right? Where if you do not physically rest, you're going to get sick. And you're probably going to get sick when it's the least convenient for you. I think that's true in mental work as well, right? If you do not let your brain rest, it will rest for you. And sometimes that will be during a practice exam, or sometimes that will be during the real test, where your brain will just shut off. And that's not useful. So you got to give it rest when you can, so that it doesn't take that rest when you really need it to work. And so I've been using that, and I think that helps me. It helps me rest, but I think it's a true statement. We see it all the time, right? Like brains just shut off if we work it too hard. So it'll take that rest for you if you don't take it.
The last mock exam I posted had 3 people nodding off in the middle of cars. Just you saw the head start to droop, and like, oh, well, they didn't sleep last night. They were
the rest will take you if you do
Yeah.
not take it, because you need it, right? We have to have rest at some point. Might as well take it when you can. So, yeah, and I think that's a great.
I think that's a great way to end. I was gonna say that's great advice that we all should take. for ourselves, and especially those who are studying for the MCAT right now. And I know for those who are gearing up to do their applications this cycle, where you are basically writing 50 pages over the next 2 months, and I'm pushing my applicants so hard right now to not rest. If they're done with their MCAT, I'm like, you're done with your personal statement, you're done with your experience writing, you're done with your school list. We're not resting right now. We are jumping right into secondaries, and I want you to pace yourself and keep going, because over the next 2 months, when it comes to completing your application, we don't have a lot of time to rest. Now, I love the advice for MCAT prep, though. I think you're literally resting is important. But we have a couple of months of really intense work. And then after that, in August, September, October, and so on, you have all the time. You're going to be waiting and waiting and waiting. So we're going to catch up on all the sleep then. We're going to have so much time to do hobbies and all the things we love. And we'll talk more about that later. So with that, why don't we say goodbye, and we'll see everybody next time. My name's Joanne Stapp with My Honest Advisor.
I'm Amanda Brown with the Brem Method.
And Doug McLemore with ICOSA Prep.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Ta-ta.